Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another wonderful episode of Excellence Journeys, where we talk about the triumphs and tribulations and challenges of my guest. And today we have a very special guest, Dan McDonnell. Dan is one of our lean experts, lean gurus, I call him. Definitely my coach for many years at Ingersoll Rand, but had a very illustrious career at General Electric where he turned a lot of minds and paradigm shifts into establishing a very great culture of lean thinking. And then that's when he was brought over to Ingersoll Rand, did a fantastic, you know, development of the operating system, setting up a team, setting up processes, and then traveled around the world, making sure that every leader got it. So that's what I know of Dan. But if I missed anything, Dan, anything that you'd like to add about your journey and your experience as you've traversed in the corporate world?
Yeah, Griselda, glad to be here this morning. um, just a couple things. One, I appreciate the lean expert banner. I don't like to hold those over myself or anyone else. I think lean is in the eye of the beholder and stuff like that. I've worked with so many people that just amaze me at how much they know and how little I know, even after 40 plus years of doing this stuff. So I don't know if you ever attain that um, kind of recommendation, but it's for me, it's just continue to be a student like all of us. And maybe the only other piece is I actually started off as a youngster in a private company up in Canada.
Oh, okay.
And I spent 14 years there, and it was kind of a high tech startup, very small when we started, grew into medium sized
Mm-hmm.
company, and we actually got acquired by General Electric. That's how I ended up there. I became the vice president of manufacturing, but that probably was our first journey into a massive business transformation using lean. In fact, in
Okay.
those days, the lean word didn't even exist. We were just trying to copy Toyota, the TPS, as much as we could understand it, from
Yeah.
the outside. And we were those years were a lot of learning and trial and error and stuff. But so that's probably where I think I got most of my kind of learning and commitment early on, before I
Okay.
went on to GE and IR.
Oh, so now you got to work with several consultants, right? I think Shingijutsu was one of them. Was that with this company or is that GE or later?
Yeah, it's interesting because with that company, we did have a kind of a consultant partner. It was a small business called Next Step Business Education that we kind of ran into when we were involved in a consortium with Alan Bradley, who later became part of Rockwell.
Okay.
And we kind of learned with Alan Bradley and with a guy named Tom Bechtel of Next Step. And Tom was a single consultant, was a huge I get impact on my learning back then. But when
Okay.
I was with GE, to your point, we did. I probably spent 14 years being mentored by various Shingijutsu senseis or admonished by various Shingijutsu
I know
senseis
I
over
got
the
to
course.
work with those guys too, and they're no easy crowd, that's for sure. But
No,
you learn a lot. I learned a ton when under their guidance.
I learned a tremendous amount from them, but they definitely keep you on your toes. And as you know, later on, we when we went to IR, we worked a lot in the early days with Simpler Consulting and Shingijutsu.
Oh, yeah.
We Simpler kind of drove overall, but we were trying to inject 3P, Toyota's 3P process into parts of IR. You and I can talk about how that went.
Yeah.
Um, and we used Shingijutsu to help us wherever we were trying to coach and teach 3P.
Hmm.
So we've both of us, I think, had the benefit of working with some really excellent teachers over the
Yeah.
years, coaches and stuff. So
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we had our bumps and bruises, no doubt, right? I mean, nothing was just like smooth cruising, but we were
no,
learning. We were learning and we were bold. We were trying, whatever it is that Shingijutsu is like, well, how about this? We were like puzzled faces. And I'm like, well, why not? But now 3P, you were, you know, humbling, but you're an author of 3P, right? So you're a master. So to me, I've learned so much from you, and I know many people from around the world, literally, right? Because I go to India and they talk about you. I go to China and they talk about you. But so tell us about the 3P journey. So that's something that you've done over the years. Have a book, right? So you're an author of a 3P book. Tell us about that journey. What was the journey of, you know, I know that not many companies do it, and I think that's why you really got onto, hey, let's write something about it because this is a powerful tool, but I think it's underutilized.
Yeah. Well, look, when I was a lot younger, like many people, read a lot of books and tried to learn through that as well as practice and coaching and everything else. But
Mhm.
um, there it wasn't and isn't a lot of information on 3P. It's the
Right.
production preparation process within Toyota. And interesting enough, for whatever reason, it's something that Toyota doesn't share that much with the outside world, and yet they share have shared many things with the outside world. So I read a lot of books written by Toyota engineers themselves back in the day, and
Hmm.
there was kind of allusions to different parts of 3P and stuff like that. And so I mean, I was a student. I was taking anything I could get and trying to play with it and stuff like that. But so for many years, I had been doing what I thought was 3P or trying to do in a number of projects and stuff like that. And, you know, it
Okay.
was all I could know. And we were with, it was my last assignment at GE. I was with GE Transportation, and we were trying to build a new wind turbine, a gearbox factory in China.
Okay.
And it was going to be a greenfield startup. And I suggested to my boss is that we should use 3P as a way to do this because we were also developing a new gearbox as well. So
Okay.
one of the things with 3P, it's really designing the product and the process at the same time in
Right.
parallel, right?
Hmm.
And some of the U.S. And European car manufacturers call it concurrent development,
Current
concurrent engineering.
engineering. Right.
3P is definitely concurrent, but it has different elements to it. So they agreed, although they didn't know much about it.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, look, we need to get some help. So we've been working with Shingazitsu with GE, as you know, quite extensively. And there
Yeah.
was a guy who was the president at the time, Mr. Nagamatsu, and my boss, Todd Wyman, and I reached out one night on a call.
Hmm.
And you know, he had a translator with him, and you know, he's like, "Ah, Dansan," you know, the usual stuff. And I
Yeah.
talked to him about 3P, and I asked whether they would come in and teach us 3P and use it to help develop this new product and plant.
Yeah.
And he said, "No, they don't do that." And
No.
so, yeah,
Not.
well, that wasn't some Shingizutsu, even though almost all of their senseis did 3P during their Toyota years,
Yeah.
they didn't have that as a service in what they coach and all that. So about a couple of weeks later, we were talking to Mr. Nagamatsu again. He changed his mind and he said,
Good.
we would be happy to teach you 3P. So we were all excited.
Nice.
And we brought, they actually had four full-time Shingizutsu senseis at the beginning of the project, and we had a plan for about 12 months. And
Wow.
they scaled it to three, then two for the remainder of the project. But I participated full time for the first 3 weeks because I was very, you know, I was
Want
kind
to
of leading the
learn.
overall program. I wanted to make sure I understood what was going on. And
Right.
for me, I guess it should have been obvious, having kind of been a student of what Toyota was doing for so long.
Hmm.
The biggest thing I learned in the first 2 days was there actually is a process for the 3P process. Before, I'd been just dabbling with different kind of tools or the odd method or something like that. But
Right.
as usual in things Toyota does, there was actually a systemic way of doing the whole thing, and it
Yeah.
was built into a process. And so anyway, we had an unbelievable result. And one thing you'll get with if you do 3P well is you'll have significant reduction overall program costs or what you typically would do.
Yeah.
Your product cost at launch will typically be 10, 15, 20 points lower than it otherwise might have been. The goal of 3P is to be on quality, on cost, and on tact within at the end of the first shift of the
Yeah.
first day of production.
Right. Yeah.
And so what happened when we were about halfway through, other GE businesses were kind of hearing about what we were doing, and GE Appliances wanted to come in. So they had like 12 different leaders from GE Appliances that approached. I said, look, if you're going to come in, then you're going to do the work, right? This isn't like
Yeah.
a showcase. So they came
Right.
in and they rolled their sleeves up for 3 days, and they participate in a lot of the Kaizen activities that
Very
were going
cool.
on.
Mm-hmm.
They got really sold and went back, and they had, I don't remember all, this is a long time ago, but I think they had like 12 major 3P programs going that were 20 to $100 million programs within about 18 months of coming in. And I did, like GE was a
Wow.
huge company. It's
Mm-hmm.
like IR, not everything spread everywhere. I think healthcare picked it up.
Mm-hmm.
It did begin to spread through the company, and I became a big believer in it. And when we came to IR, it was a whole new story, but
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really pushing 3P that hard. We were trying to drive enterprise transformation through the whole company.
Right.
But for some of the new product development activities that were going on, we were trying to get people to kind of think about doing it. And,
Mm-hmm.
as you mentioned earlier, sometimes things are messy and they're hard to
Right.
do. But we did, make some decent progress in the company, but it was a bit of a hard sell.
Yeah, but there was some awesome projects that I know I got to work with you, like Arecibo thermal. There's that big product line that was fantastic. And when you say, and I just want to like focus on the results of what this tool and what you wrote in your teachings and what you learned, but in terms of time to implement, for example, cut by half. I mean, instead of taking you like 10 months, you could do it in 4 or 5 months. That's one, right? The other thing that I noticed is,
I think, yes, and Griselda, I think one of the keys, and this is something that I think Toyota tries to teach in almost everything, is
yeah,
part of 3P is way more upfront planning
yes,
and a lot less time doing,
right.
right? And I think that's the biggest, the overall cycle time for a
Right.
program
Mhm.
is you have to commit yourself to do a lot more planning when it feels like you're not really making a lot of progress.
Yep.
And yeah, but when you finally like go to unleash, it just goes, it's not simple and there's always hiccups, but
Right.
it goes a lot smoother and quicker than otherwise. But yes,
Yeah.
quicker cycles are
Quicker
definitely,
cycles and making mistakes, right? Trying things out, experimenting, but doing it up front, right? And once you do that, what it does for the budget of, cost of the program and the timeline,
yeah.
it's fantastic. And so I
The other
know,
thing, Griselda, I think is that, a lot of us who practice this stuff, we start doing, transformation in a product or a process or a company, whatever.
right.
Um, we start from some current state, and usually it's not all that lean.
Yeah.
When
Hmm.
you do 3P and you launch a new product, um, you are starting from day one with a high level of lean maturity in the overall process. Like you're launching with that. Now,
Yeah.
we all know that lean is a never-ending journey.
Right.
That there's always ways to get better, a lot better. So
Hmm.
even after a 3P launch, it's not like, okay, I've launched the perfect mousetrap. Now let's go on.
Right.
But it definitely positions you right from the out of the gate with a much higher level of maturity in the processes. But also, what I've experienced is the products. We talk about design for manufacturability, design for quality,
Yep.
both internal and external. You
Hmm.
often end up with a much more robust product that is a lot more standardized.
Yeah.
And part of the reason is because the manufacturing engineers are working hand in glove with the design engineers, and
Right.
they go back and forth trying to both optimize the parts, the bill of
Yeah.
material, as well as the process by which they're made, and
Mhm.
can become pretty magical in terms
Oh,
of the
absolutely.
result.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember even some suppliers coming on board and looking to see what we're doing. And we would actually propose some design changes to some of the components because of what they saw on the line. It was phenomenal. Yeah.
You know, I
So
had a big learning.
what's that?
I've had like hundreds of them over the years, but
Yeah.
this was for me one that I wasn't expecting. And as you know, Mike Lamach was our chairman and CEO,
Mhm.
and I had been trying to get 3P going elsewhere. And in those days, as you know, we had four major sectors, we called them
Right.
at the time. And
Hmm.
our biggest sector in climate, the VP ops there became a big fan. And while they were early in their journey, they really embraced it and they were taken off. And I was struggling to try and sell it to the other three sectors, and
Yeah.
one of which you were part of. And
I remember those days. Yes, they were
this
not
wasn't
buying
you, but
into
it
it.
was definitely the leaders there didn't mind to
Yes.
do with it.
Hmm.
And I was getting pretty frustrated because the climate, business was starting to make some real inroads with 3P.
Yeah.
And I ended up on a flight to Campbellsville, Kentucky with Mike, the chairman. And
Yep.
I was always nervous being around him because this guy's the
We all were.
CEO. Uh,
He was just
and
massive,
I
and you would get that raised eyebrow that would like put you on edge. I'm like, oh, did I do something wrong?
and it was just me and him on the flight.
Uh-huh.
I thought, oh my God, I got to spend 2 hours in the air. So I prepared all these questions because
Hmm.
with Mike, I found if you could steer the conversation, he could ask you a million different things of which you may not have the answer for,
Everything.
90% of them. So if
Right.
you could steer the conversation, you probably would survive better. But Mike actually was a very humble,
Oh
easy guy
yeah,
to work with, but
absolutely.
it was a bit nerve wracking. So anyway,
Hmm.
one of the questions I asked, I said, Mike, I wanted to get your opinion on something, and I thought I knew directionally what he was going to say, and he threw me for a complete loop.
Well, what did you think? So I haven't heard the story of what did you think he was going to say. I know the post, but what did you
I
think?
thought he was going to give me advice on how I could better influence and sell the other three sectors,
Ah.
like what I was doing wrong and what I could change in my influencing and selling methodology to get them on board. That's what I was expecting to
Mm.
hear from him, right? And I
Okay.
was ready to take those lessons and go try them.
Right.
So I described the situation to him. He didn't know much about 3P. I described what it was, why I believed in it for particularly for new product launches,
Yes.
and then I described what was going on in climate and some of the programs they'd taken on, some of the outcomes they were getting as a result.
Right.
And then I explained to him, I can't get the other three sectors on board with it. And I've tried very hard. They don't have anything to do with it. And so he looked at me and he said, triple down on climate.
There you
And
go.
all I remember in my head, I was like, what? Like that was like first I didn't know what he like that he would even say something like that, but it
Right.
wasn't what I was expecting. And I must have had a confused look on my face, which because I was.
Yeah.
And he said, listen, if you believe very much in 3P and the benefit to our company, and it sounds like you do,
Yep.
every single leader in this company is an A player. They all want to be the next
Top
VP. They
notch.
want to be the next sector president,
Right.
every one of them. And
Yes.
they watch what everyone else is doing. So if you really believe in this, then triple down in climate and help them make significant progress. The other three are watching.
Yes, they
And
were
if
watching.
they conclude that climate is getting, more investment money and getting more kudos and stuff like that, eventually they'll come around and they'll pull from you instead of you pushing it on them. So that was his advice. I
Yeah.
was still a little skeptical, but
Heck.
I thought about it. I reflected on it quite a bit after that trip, and I said, okay, that's
Yep.
what he was, as you know, Mike was a guy that was a tremendous teacher.
Yes.
So I did. I stopped
And it
talking about
worked.
it.
It worked
It worked.
phenomenally.
Climate actually started ramping it up. And
Yeah.
I think that you guys were the first other sector that actually approached and
Yep.
said, "Hey, we'd like to
Be
learn a little
next.
bit more." You and Jeff Green, and
Right.
so within I don't know, a year of that, we had it moving in all four of the sectors.
Everybody wanted to do it, right? Everybody wanted because the
Yes.
results were phenomenal, right? I mean, the product cost like 20-25% lower. We came in ahead of plan, budget,
Yep.
and then the enthusiasm of the people. That was cool. When you
Yes.
had that a small scale mock-up and you would just walk it through, you would just see those shiny eyes of the people explaining the process with just string and cardboard and toothpicks and all that we found. But it was pretty phenomenal. But yes, that's a
Yeah.
awesome story that was a revolution at IR because from that point on, everybody that was designing a new product line, they wanted to do 3P. It
Yeah.
was fantastic. Yeah.
One of the lessons, though, the deep lessons for me there, and
Uh-huh.
look, when you're trying to drive change anywhere, it's not easy, and people resist change. I resist change, even though I've been a change person my whole
Yeah.
career.
Uh-huh.
But you do have to push change sometimes and somewhat,
Yep.
right? There
Hmm.
has to be a natural momentum to get the car that's stuck out of the ditch, right, before you can get it
Get it
rolling and all
going.
that stuff.
Yeah.
But to the degree that you can create pull for change
Hmm.
versus you as a change leader pushing
Right.
change on people, it's exponentially
Wonders.
easier to go
Absolutely.
do that. And so thinking about what could I do
Yep.
that would cause this person, this leadership team, this plant, this division, this sales group to pull some of the stuff
Yeah.
we're doing off of us, right? And if we
Right.
could find a way to do that, and are ways to do that,
Yeah.
change gets accepted a lot more, and it just goes so much faster. But it's interesting because one of the tenets, as you know, and the principles
It's
of
cool.
TPS or
Yeah.
lean, which is another story I'd like to talk about just on LinkedIn today, some of the confusion that's out there, but
Yeah.
is pull versus push, right?
Yes.
Almost everything most
Hmm.
companies do with processes is they push work through the system, whatever
Right.
system they have or don't have.
Yes. Hmm.
And one of the keys to lean thinking is to find a way to pull work
Pull
at the
it.
pace of customer demand,
Absolutely.
right? And so
Yes.
I found finding a way to pull change
It worked.
is way easier
Hmm.
culturally than it is to just push change on people. So that was a
Absolutely.
big lesson for
It
me.
was a big lesson for all of us, right? Because we all saw it. I'm like, oh my God, now we had to like triple our team or something to be able to keep up with the pull, the demand, because everybody wanted to do it. And it was fantastic, right? We did keep up with it, and there was some phenomenal results. So a couple of things. We will get to that, confusion that you mentioned because I do see some tidbits out there on LinkedIn, and I want to touch point on that. Before we go there, though, you brought up Mike and our time there at Ingersoll Rand, and Todd and Marcia, right? The notion of what I quickly learned at Ingersoll Rand, not that it was not there before where I was before, but it was very pronounced at Ingersoll Rand, and that's the notion of servant leadership and that
Yes.
whole fundamental respect for people, and that's why we do what we do, right, to make their lives better. Can you tell us more about that, because I think that kind of gets glossed over, and I believe it's a reason why lean doesn't take off in some places, because they really don't grasp that notion of we're here to serve those that are making product, or those that are you know doing meaningful work, serving people in general, functional leaders as well. But talk to us about that concept of servant leadership.
Yeah, I think it's a huge point. Look, before we got to IR, Todd Wyman and I did a stint together in GE Transportation. We
Yep, I
kind
remember.
of developed this simple little graphic, and we had a upside down pyramid. We called it flipping the pyramid.
Yep.
And we got that actually we mentored a bit with Herman Miller, who became kind of a mentor of ours. He was a great lean company in his day.
Yes. Hmm.
Um, and so the concept is that if you think about it, almost every company has a pyramid of leadership. There's nothing
Yep.
wrong with that. And the top person, and then it goes down, and everyone at the bottom, kind of the doers, and the
Hmm.
value providers.
Yep.
And so if you flip the pyramid, it puts the value providers at the very top,
Hmm.
and it suggests that the leaders below them frontline supervisors all the way down
Right.
to executives and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Their role primarily is to serve the value providers, not the other
Right.
way around. So it's just a graphic that we're obviously not going to flip the pyramid, organization companies, but
No.
we conceptually can do that in terms of how we act and behave and think. And so that became part of what we were trying to do at Ingersoll Rand. And you mentioned the word servant leadership. Look, there's whole books and topics on it, and
Yeah.
I think it's pretty wide ranging. And I've never delved into all of the myriad of it, but one of the things for me
Mm-hmm.
that really struck was this concept of Socratic leadership, which is a big
Okay.
part of um, servant leadership. And
It
it's
is.
also, I think, a big part of respect for people. I think it's the biggest part personally.
Mm-hmm.
And so look, I kind of, even though I had like management roles most of my career and
Mm-hmm.
leadership roles and was a VP a lot of the time. Um, but I always saw myself as a coach first and foremost everywhere I worked. And I mean, a lot of times I just called myself a coach,
Yeah.
regardless of the title.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started to learn more about the Socratic leadership thing, and I guess it really took home because Mike Lamach, the CEO, was probably the greatest Socratic leader I've ever met in my entire career. It was unbelievable how he did this stuff. But
Yeah.
the principle is really learning how to ask the right questions instead of just always giving the right answer.
Yep.
That to me was the core tenet of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made it a mission of mine in my development plans
Yeah.
early on in IR to become more of a Socratic leader.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. I
It is.
maybe at best I'm average at it, even after all these years of trying, but because
Uh-huh.
it's not easy to do. But
Right.
the principle, like when you're a coach, when you're a leader, you probably have more overall high level knowledge than most of the other
And
people
others.
under you.
Right.
Not necessarily, and there's always on certain things people that are way smarter than you and always will be and stuff like. But in
Yep.
general, you get to be a coach or you get to be a leader because you've achieved some level of knowledge and capability. I
Right.
realize there's bad leaders out there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But in general, that's what happens, right? And
Yes.
so a lot of times you do have a directional understanding of where you want to go or how you would like things to be done and stuff like that. And most of us, if you're a good coach and you're passionate about it, you love coaching and
Love
teaching
it.
people, right? And you
Yep.
go out there and
Mm-hmm.
you're not nefarious in your
No.
your reasons for it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
self-centered, and it's just you love doing it. So you
Right.
go out and you impart all kinds of answers on people, right? And a lot of it's from energy and passion and
Right.
interest in developing them and stuff like that. And I did that in spades.
Yeah.
But rather than give them an answer, if you just
Listen.
pause and you
Yeah.
say you figure out what the right question to ask them
Yeah.
is, and what you're trying to do is you're not asking gotcha questions, you're not asking
No.
questions to embarrass them or shut them down or going
No.
5 levels deep. You're asking a question that is going to cause them to think about what
Ah.
you want, where you want them to get to. It's a bit like
Right.
leading the horse to water,
It
right?
is. Yes.
Uh,
Uh-huh.
and uh, and so Socratic leadership became something that I practiced a lot in myself, instead of just always giving the right answer. Now, there's times I'll pull a whiteboard out, and we'll do flip charts and
Oh
teach and
yeah.
coach and stuff. And I probably still resort to that way more than I do kind of the Socratic line, but I
Yeah.
inject it. Whereas Michael Mock would, he hardly ever gave an answer, and he was very respectful of people. And when he
Right.
went out and they had a problem or an issue, he just asked them a question.
Yes.
And then they would think about it and give him an answer. And then he'd ask another question. Then he'd ask another question. And eventually they sort of came up with the answer that he likely wanted them to
Wanted.
get
Yeah.
anyway. But when they
Right.
do, it sticks a lot more because they feel that
It was there.
they created it themselves or they found the
Yeah.
answer themselves versus they were
Right.
handed it to them, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that's a piece of respect for people, I think. And I think it's
Right.
so powerful as a coach as a leader coach,
Yeah.
that you can learn to do more and more of that. But back to respect for people. When we were driving an overall enterprise transformation, we had a high-level steering committee. It had two division presidents,
Yep.
about four C-suite people, and we ran it with an A3. Everything was done with A3
Everything.
thinking, as you
Yep.
know, in IR.
Mm-hmm.
I had to, because I was leading the overall transformation, I had to update on the A3 once a quarter to this leadership team.
Yeah.
And one of the key elements of the overall transformation was driving a culture of respect for people. It was a very important one. It was only one, though. It was
Right.
not the only thing we were driving. I want to make that clear, but it was
Yeah.
important. And
Yeah.
but I remember I don't know, it was probably a year and a half in, and we were
Okay.
making a lot of progress all over the place. And the company was doing great, and with customers, with shareholders,
Right.
our engagement, we measured
Through
engagement
the
every
roof.
year was starting to go up a lot. It was really starting to have an impact, and I had to do an update to the steering committee. And I remember we were in this conference room with Mike, the chairman,
Yeah.
and Mike asked me what I felt the biggest problem was today with the transformation still.
Hmm.
So I knew that this was one of these, questions. So I'm thinking about it, and like maybe
Yeah.
only 3 or 4 seconds went by, but it seemed like I thought about it for 10 minutes. But
Right.
I gave him an answer. Obviously it wasn't the right answer, because he looked at me kind of strange. And then he asked one of the other leaders in the room, and he asked three people, and he
Okay.
obviously didn't get the right. And so Mike was a very calm person. He very
Yes.
rarely yelled, but he was forceful in his answers.
Yes,
And
he
he
was.
gave us all this coaching that he said he sees, because Mike went to Gemba a lot.
He
He
did.
said, I see a lack of respect for people everywhere I go in this company, every
Wow.
day. And he
Wow.
said, we are not making progress on respect for people. And that was kind of one of my scorecards. Obviously, I
Yeah, it
failed that
was. I
quarterly thing on
remember.
that element, because he was very serious. And
Mhm.
I had to admit, we weren't making progress. So this is a true story. So like, after I got that lecture and guidance that, hey, we
Yeah.
need to go rethink how we're going to go do this kind of cultural transformation, we went to La Crosse, Wisconsin, and Mike
Okay.
was there, and we
Hmm.
we actually had a large team, we had about 12 leaders there. The president of the division was there,
Uh-huh.
a couple of the ops VP, or the VPs, and some C-suite people.
Okay.
And we flew up in the corporate jet. We got there, and La Crosse had a number of different buildings, and so the plant manager was not there that day. Probably good for them, but
Hmm.
and we got out of the SUVs, because we had to drive to a number of the buildings. We go
I
in our first
remember.
building, and one of their model projects was at the end of one of the lines. They were putting a one-piece flow process in
Okay.
on
Hmm.
this commercial HVAC unit, and I still remember. So we go walking in, and Mike had coached us on the plane. He said, "Look, everywhere we go, everyone wants to kind of they want to preach to us. They want to."
Yeah.
He said, "We want to observe what's really going on there and stuff like that. So we're going to stay in the background, and we're just going to spend our time observing. So we're okay."
Oh,
So anyway,
okay.
we get to the first board, and
Yeah.
this is part of their daily management process, and it was a team board, and one of the he was kind of a middle manager, was leading this session,
Okay.
and there was 12 of us in kind of a horseshoe around maybe 15, 16 people.
Okay.
I remember this like night and day. So this is 2 weeks after I got the lack of progress and respect for
Yeah,
people
yeah.
from
The
Mike.
update, the
So
update in his office.
yeah, and it starts off, and this guy goes, "Do you think we're going to have any quality issues today?" And this lady was like an hourly team leader. I don't remember her name. She puts her hand up and she says, I think we're going to have lots of quality issues today, given the fact that you took three of my best people, and I've got two other people in here that haven't been trained and don't know what they're doing. And I think we're going to have a lot of
Wow.
problems today. So I'm in the background, right? I'm listening to this, and the guy ignores her, like literally just, and he goes on and he's going through his script and stuff like that. Didn't even address it. And he said, "Do you think we're going to have any problems making tack today?" Same woman puts her hands up and says, "Listen, the fact that I'm five people short today to the standard work and stuff like that, we are going to miss tacked all day long and stuff." So the guy ignored it. It was crazy.
And
He
no
just
way, again
ignores her.
ignored her.
And it's like he's going through a script, right?
Wow.
And all I could see Mike, he's kind of three over
Ew.
from me, and his hands are literally shaking, right? And
Yes, he
that
is
was it.
not gonna like that.
He parted his way through the crowd, and he's in front of this guy, and he starts asking him, did you hear what
She had to say.
so and so said, right? And the guy's standing there and all this stuff. So anyway, we continue with that thing. We did a couple other stops, then we walked back out to get in the car to go to the next building. And Mike, he was so like, and he was very angry. He was as angry as I've ever seen him. And I'm thinking, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it was a rough flight home after that day. But that was an example of the kind of stuff that typically goes on everywhere in companies.
Right.
And, obviously that leader wasn't showing respect for the people.
Yeah.
And look, I get because respect for people to me isn't like foo-fooey. Some people think it's
No.
like, we're all nice and kumbaya and all this stuff.
Uh-uh.
I don't see respect for people that way. I think it's what the word means, right? And it's listening to people, it's paying attention to them, it's behaving. It's look, for me, what I always coach people is think about how you feel when you've been
Yeah.
feel respected or disrespected and
Right.
whatever the other person was doing, and then don't do the disrespect stuff, right? Because
Exactly.
that's how it
It's walk
feels,
in their
right?
shoes, right? Walk in their shoes, and
Yeah,
then you know exactly what the feeling is, right? Now,
yeah,
now in that case, I remember that exactly because we came back and all of what was happening there at lacrosse, it really reflected back to us, right?
yeah,
We were deploying the system, we were coaching, we were guiding them, and obviously we missed something because this guy thought it was okay to dismiss her input, right? I
yes,
remember that, and it was the very, very resounding message that you came back to us with. And then little things like that would grab Mike's attention immediately. The if someone showed up a few seconds late to the Gemba meeting, I'm like, they're here on time. Why are they not, right? A plant manager or a materials
yeah,
leader or whomever, right? It was respect the fact that we're here for them. Their time is just as valuable as ours, and we're not going to be late, right? And never pull out the phone. Remember, that was a rule.
yes,
Then
yes,
never do this in front of a Gemba because you're supposed to be all ears and attention. But
yes,
but those are the things that small things but really mattered and people noticed it, right? It was like, oh my God, the CEO and the chairman, the entire 3 hours sometimes of a walk or going through a visit, never picked up his phone, never
yes,
touched it.
never,
And that was his notion of telling all of us, we respect you, I'm listening, I'm engaged, and you should be too. Mhm.
yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember those fun times, Dan. Lots of learnings for you and I. A lot of boot camp too, a lot of training. Now, so coming back to confusion. So tell us a little bit about that. And I'll just leave it open to say, what do you mean by confusion and what's happening out there in, let's call it lean speak in LinkedIn and, as people are coaching and guiding other leaders?
Well, let me come at it from two angles. First is just there's all the lean naysayers and stuff like that, and to
Yeah.
some degree I guess I get it, but I'm more a positive optimistic person. And look, where I've had some lean failures for sure, I think every one of us had, is very hard to do. But by the way, it's not even do it lean.
No.
If you commit yourself to get healthy, if you commit yourself to make the varsity team in school, if you commit
Yeah.
yourself to get straight A's in your class, is not easy, right?
No.
Especially if you're like an average student and you say, I'm tired, I want to get straight A's, right? It's
Right.
possible to do it, but
Yeah.
none of this stuff is easy. And even if most people try, they're probably not going to get all the way there, right? Because it's
Yeah.
tough. So the point though is that when I started learning a lot of this stuff, it was based on as best as we could understand TPS,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And in the days, that lean sort of came out of a book that Jim Womack wrote, and people critic, but whether he got everything right or not is irrelevant. It just became more of an industry standard term because calling it TPS, because the Toyota production system, when you're not Toyota, is kind of like, and
Not
so
you.
lean just started to get adopted. And in those days, I started calling it lean, but I was doing TPS,
Yeah,
right? And
of
it
course.
just lean was just the banner on the thing, right? And
Right.
almost all of my colleagues all over were beginning to call it lean. Because
Yeah.
before that, we called it TPS, JIT, Agile. I mean, there's all kinds of names, but it
Right.
was
Yeah.
doing the same thing. And um, but it was based as best as we could understand the Toyota system on TPS.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what lean is. And then,
Mhm.
as you know, there's all kinds of other terms. I just adopted whatever companies were using, right? Like,
Right.
so in IR, we used operational excellence, right?
Yeah.
But it was a euphemism for lean, a euphemism for TPS, and we just
Yeah.
happened to call it operational excellence, right? But
Right.
if you knew what's underneath Mike Lamach wanted us to go inject TPS like
Yes.
principles into the company, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
what I've seen over the last 20 years or so is that people have sort of bastardized lean.
Hmm.
Uh, Not everybody, but some, and they've created their variants of it. They've got way
Right.
away from the principles and stuff. And sometimes you can't even write when you listen to people coaching on lean. You're like, well, what are you even talking about, right? And
Yes.
they're all over LinkedIn. And then you get all the fake lean people that are out there as fake lean and lean and all this stuff. And you read all this stuff and you're like, it's just
Yeah.
utter nonsense. So the truth
Yeah.
is, if you want to really learn lean and or quote TPS,
Yes.
find a sensei, a consultant that has a track record that you
Yes.
believe in, and bring them on as your
Bring them in.
coach and mentor, right?
Right.
And be discernitive enough that you're not going to get sucked into some of the snake oil salesmen that are
Yeah.
out there, right? And there
Yeah.
always is. It doesn't matter what subject, topic, product and stuff.
It's
There's
not just
always
lean.
snake
Yeah.
oil salesmen, the
Anything.
history of mankind, right? And there's
Right.
snake oil salesmen in continuous improvement and everything else. But there's also people that have a long track record of doing it over and over again with significantly successful results. And those are the people you should seek out, listen to, and take coaching from. So that's one.
Yeah.
So, like anything in life, there's a lot of lean nonsense out there. And then
Right.
there's a lot of really great lean driven principled programs. And,
Hmm.
you got to be able to discern them.
Right.
The second
Absolutely.
thing for me, and this is maybe one of the biggest lessons
Okay.
ever, and it also drives me crazy today
What's
on
that?
LinkedIn, right? So I'll just give you my story. So when I started with that private company, I started my journey of learning.
Hmm.
We were almost all tools based. In fact, in those days, Toyota held back
Hmm.
all of the cultural stuff, right? They
They
never showed
did.
people that. In fact, it's hard to see anyway unless you work there.
Right.
But they opened their doors and they wrote books and they showed you all of the tools and
The
all
tools,
of
the templates,
oh
the
yeah. And so
analysis sheets and all of those documents. There
we
was
did
like,
them all for
yeah,
10 years and
yeah,
we practiced them and we perfected them and we had
right.
Kanban out there. We did JIT, we did Jidoka. And to be honest with you, we made huge progress.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I went on to GE and we did the same. So I was very much one of those quote tools guys, right?
Yes.
And I didn't know any different at the
Mhm.
time. And I probably was 15 years that way of my career, a heavy, heavy tools guy.
Yeah.
And we made a lot of progress everywhere we went,
Everywhere.
almost everywhere we went with
Yeah.
stuff. So when I
Hmm.
mentioned Herman Miller before, when I was at GE Transportation, Herman Miller took us under their wing, and there's a guy there, Ken Goodson, was the COO, And he
Hmm.
had a big lean guru. His name was Matt Long. And those
I
two
remember
were kind of
that.
partners in their journey. But they did
Yes, they did.
phenomenal things in
I
my
was
mind.
there one time.
So we were sitting in one of their training classes, and they had this one simple sheet of paper up, and it was like a tree, hand-drawn tree. It had roots and the
Yeah,
trunk and a bunch of branches and leaves and all this stuff.
right.
But at the top, it said, "It's the culture, stupid."
Yes,
It was in
that's
big
it.
font, and
Yes,
and then it had a bunch of words around us that I still remember that one sheet. And
right.
my boss and I, we really reflected on that sheet, and we were going like, wow, what do they mean? And so we started to learn more. So I got heavily into this cultural part of lean, right?
Yeah,
Which Toyota, and the other thing that did it was Todd Wyman, who was my boss, our boss later
yep,
on in
our
IR,
boss.
had gone, took a team through Toyota Georgetown.
Yeah.
And he was walking with one of the VPs, and he asked the guy, because he was very curious, but he said, "Why do you let so many people into your plant to tour, including your major competitors?" And the guy looked at him. Todd said, he didn't even take a breath. He looked at me, he says, "Because what they need to know, they cannot see."
Yes.
And Todd took that, and then there was the Herman Miller thing with culture. And so we got heavily in it. We became these cultural transformation, uh,
Yes.
aficionados. And so I switched from, no, we didn't totally abandon tools, but
No,
I
we still know
became
the tools,
this
right? But
culture change guy. And I was like, oh man, this is the missing ingredient. I was like, we got
yes,
all, and then I got to IR, and I still came. So I'd been a tools guy, and I was a culture guy. And I
yes,
remember it was the first year and a half ago, we brought John Shook in from
right,
LEI to present at our leadership conference. And he also presented some seminars to some of the leadership teams
right.
separately. And John had this one sheet of paper or slide that he put up, which I still remember, like it's the culture stupid
The
slide.
culture
And he
stupid.
had a balance, like a simple little weigh scale,
Yep.
and it was completely balanced. And on one side, he said, people, social people, culture.
Culture.
And on the other side, he had process,
Tools.
tools, technical.
Yep.
Okay. And here's what his message was. He said, if you're trying to drive an overall transformation, you need to focus on both sides, both the social,
Yep.
cultural, people side, as well as the technical process tool side. And you need to do them in relatively equal measures. And you can't measure it, and you shouldn't try to measure it. And you shouldn't
Feel
get
it.
all hung up on it. And just like every 6 months or so, just check in.
Pulse
If
it.
you think you're spending way more time on culture than you are process change and improvement, then dial it back a bit and
Right.
ramp up a bit of the process stuff. If you find you're shifted, you're spending way too much time on process and technical change and not as much on people, then dial it back a bit and shift it
Yeah.
back up. But that was like the aha moment for me. I had 10 years left after 30 years of being a student, and I
Yes.
realized it is about both. And it
Yes.
is absolutely about both. And that has been the game changer for Toyota since the very beginning.
Yes.
And but now what we have on LinkedIn is all these, like it's all culture, all respect for people, all the time,
Hmm.
right? And
Both.
they denigrate tools. It's like, oh my, you can't be a tool. And I'm like, are you kidding me? These are the
Mhm.
coaching that they're giving today. And I'm telling you, if all you do is focus on improving culture, improving people, driving respect for people more. It's a great thing to do, and it
Not a,
will help a lot, and it will
yes.
help make print. It'll be a better place to work, but you will limit
You will,
the amount of
yeah.
progress you make if you aren't driving all the principles, right? If you aren't moving from push to pull, right?
Right.
If you aren't focused on one piece flow, you can't ignore all of the principles, and so many people do, right? The whole culture side is one important piece of ingredients of the
Yeah.
stew. Okay. But
Yes.
if you have bad meat in the stew, you can put all the
Yeah.
other stuff in and it's going to taste like crap, right?
Doesn't
So
matter.
this is where I feel like the lean people have shifted, or at least a lot of them, and they're getting a lot of play. And I think they're ill advising so
Right.
many youngsters who are kind of trying to learn. So for me, I believe it's about both driving massive improvement in process capability
Yep.
as well as massive improvement in your overall people and cultural behaviors and treatment. And if you find a way to do both, you significantly increase the odds that you can get to a high level sustained outcome, even though it's still going to be hard as hell
It is
because
hard.
getting great
Yeah.
is never
Right.
easy no matter what you do. And many people will never get to great, but they
Yeah,
might get to good
absolutely. Yeah.
when they
Eh,
were average or poor. Um,
Absolutely. And I'm a firm believer, I'm with you there and I've lived it, right? Culture drives profit, but that is the why, right? Why is it that we're doing this? And everyone engages to take that company forward in a big way. Now, the how is critically important, right? It's not
yes.
just the why we're doing it, it was the how we do it, and that everyone does it consistently is also really important. That we all problem solve the same way. So we can speak the same language within a company, right? When that
Yes.
happens, everyone's marching forward in the same direction. Woo! It's mind blowing and fun.
Yep. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. But totally agree that you need both. And I've seen some companies that focus on one or the other with major setbacks, sometimes years of setback of, hey, we focused too much on the tools, did some great results.
Yep.
Did they sustain? No. And that was
Yes.
because the culture side was missing, right? They didn't train the people, they didn't know the lean principles, they didn't
Yep.
know the simulations wasn't, understood well. But absolutely,
And I'd
the
say the exact opposite. The ones that are just totally driving culture now and they're not focused on the principles or the two other principles or tools, they're going to find the same thing. They'll get
yeah,
gains, they'll make improvements, it'll be a better place
absolutely.
to work, be
Yeah.
good for people and all this stuff. But their odds of driving sustained high level outcome differences are minimal.
Yeah.
You have to do both.
Yeah,
And,
it'll
and
be
by the
worth the
way,
watch.
back at IR, so
Mm-hmm.
this is maybe a subset of this.
Yeah.
We, as you know, we drove A3 thinking really heavily, both in problem solving as well as doing projects and
Strategy.
programs, Kaizens. We had different
Right.
A3s for different things,
Yep.
but we also use problem solving A3s extensively everywhere.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we found was in either in a project A3 step uh, 5, where we either are doing we've done root cause analysis and we're doing countermeasures to
Countermeasures.
correct for that,
Mhm.
right? Or we've done a gap analysis between our initial state and our target state,
Yep.
and we're trying to do a plan to how we're going to close the gaps, right?
Yeah.
What we found for a while there, and this was a big learning maybe around year 2 or year 3, somewhere in there, was that when people were doing improvements, they weren't using the lean principles. They would, and so people think that, hey, just because I make a process better, and they might have made it better. So, for
Hmm.
example, let's say they have a batch and queue process, and there's a certain yield problem,
Yeah.
and they go and attack it, and they get the yield improved by say 35%, which is a big
Right.
change,
Yeah.
but they're still batch and queue.
Yeah.
That's not what we were trying to get them to do. While they were driving improvement, we wanted them to drive improvement using the principles, not just
Yeah.
not using traditional thinking
Right.
and making the traditional thinking a bit better. We wanted you to take the traditional thinking that had a problem or an opportunity and
Yes.
use a principle in order to
Yeah.
go do that countermeasure. And so, and then we spent probably a year reviewing the countermeasures
Yeah.
and the solution approaches that teams, and we coach them on it, right? Because they were making the traditional better
Right. And we need
instead
it to
of
be repeatable,
creating,
right?
the business operating system that we
Right.
were trying to get them to create. And so that's important too, right?
It is.
It's you can't get away from the principles.
Mm-hmm.
They have to, your job is to find a way to embed them and mature them and
Yes.
grow their capability year by year by year. That's how you get to world class. And if you
Absolutely.
just want to keep doing traditional better, you'll get better, but
Mhm.
there's a limit.
There's a limit, and I don't think it'll sustain. That's another thing that
I
I've seen
agree.
also. Yeah. So now, so we'll end with this on the future of manufacturing. I know you and I have talked about this, and you've talked a little bit about lean and how it's been misinterpreted. But what do you see as our main challenges here for where we are in manufacturing? We know where it was back in the 90s, right? But what what's your take on the trajectory that we've been on, and what is our future? What do we have to do slightly different, do you think?
Well, listen, I'm retired now, and I get to sit back like an armchair quarterback
And
up in the
watch.
cheap seats and watch
Ah,
everyone else go through the horrors. But look, to be honest with you, if I was 20 years old again, I'd be excited as hell because
yeah.
so let me just tell a quick story. When I first got into manufacturing and I got into TPS as a really young student who knew nothing,
Yeah.
um, it was the early 80s.
Okay.
And General Motors was busy with this huge thing they called SIM, computer integrated manufacturing.
Mm.
In those days, there started to be goals put out to create the lights out factory. Right? This is
Ah,
the 80s, right? We were going
okay.
to develop factories without people. And it was like
Oh,
Star
wow.
Wars back then, right?
Mhm.
And GM literally spent hundreds of billions of dollars on sim.
Wow.
Robots that are nowhere near like we have today, fibros, automated guided vehicles, all kinds of stuff
All
back
of
then.
those.
And
Yeah.
I lived in a town which is a massive GM town. Okay. Now,
Okay.
Toyota was doing pockets of automation, right? Which they continue to do. They weren't investing all this money. They kept doing TPS, right?
Mm-hmm.
And through the 80s and 90s, Toyota absolutely dominated the big three, right? Now, it was pretty cool what they were trying to do. But I remember in those days, it felt to me like this is a fine wine before it's time. In other words, this stuff, the principles of it, the thoughts of it are cool. It's just the technology wasn't even remotely capable. So
Close.
here we
Right.
are today.
Yeah.
And when you think about 3D modeling, right? 3D printing and stuff like that, it's just we're at the genesis. What like you and I have cut chips our whole
Yeah.
career, right? We
Right.
take a block of steel and we chip away and chip away. And it's like an artist who takes
Mm-hmm.
this, makes a sculpture out of
Chisel.
the thing. That's how we've done it for 150 years, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, and it's
Not
not like
anymore.
that's going to completely go away, but as 3D printing increases, you're going to
Yeah.
find that most people they additive manufacture, right? We don't have all this waste. You basically
Right.
print a part. In fact, some of the bills of material in some of the small jet engines in GE, 30% of the bills are printed now. This is a
Printed.
jet engine part. Okay. This
Wow.
is printed parts.
Yes.
Like, so machine shops that you and I are used to, like 10 years from now, when I walk in, they're going to look like they do.
Nope.
AI, all these guided vehicles, right? Like my point is, I think manufacturing is in such exciting times
It is.
that it's going to grow and the capabilities because I think the technology capability is in its sweet spot versus 30, 40 years ago, right?
Right.
When some people
Yes.
had the same thoughts. Now,
Mhm.
when I coach where I can, is that this technology stuff is fantastic when it has real use cases, right? Instead of,
Mhm.
just people are doing it for the sake of
Reusing it.
doing it, right?
No, right.
But when you implement it, you need to implement it with the same principles that we know are some of the best things, right? How do you make work flow? How do we pull? How do we have respect for people, right?
Right.
Around things and stuff like that. So I believe that the new manufacturing era is going to be exciting as hell.
Yes.
It's going to be they're going to be able to do things that you and I could only ever dream of being able to do in terms of capability, in terms of
Right.
repeat and quality and stuff like that.
Quality improvement.
My fear is that
Hmm.
people are going to let technology drive versus let people drive. And
Ah,
they're going to abandon the core principles of excellence, which have been, and by the way, Toyota didn't create most of them. And they're honest about that and open
yeah.
about it. They learned from stuff in
The US
1900,
and other places.
right?
Yeah.
And a lot of these principled lessons have been around in manufacturing for 500. The Romans did some of them, right? So
Right.
if the new folks leading today in the growing manufacturing sector embrace these new technologies, innovate them, and embody them with the principles, I think that the next 40 years could be the most exciting time for anyone manufacturing. Now, I need it because I got, I'm on a fixed income and I need my stocks to keep going up so I can, enjoy my retirement years. So I'm cheering
Yeah.
everybody on.
There you go.
Because as an old mentor told me a long time ago, there's only three ways in the world to generate new wealth. You can either grow it, mine it or you can make it. That's it. There's no
That's
other
it.
way. And
Hmm.
the best of the three is making it. And the countries that have the greatest manufacturing prowess and
Yes.
capability are the ones that are going to dominate
Dominant.
economically. And
Yes.
I'm cheering, for our homeland because I think that this is what's going to keep us apart from everything. So go manufacturing.
Go manufacturing, absolutely. And for those of us that are in it, right, it's hard to retire because of that, because you see all of this cool technology and AI and the power of what they can do. But you're right, it is
It's
good
not
to
that
keep
hard,
an eye.
Griselda.
Yeah, to keep an eye on it, but you also need to make sure that you don't lose the fundamentals, the basics, the
Yes,
principles of why is it that we're applying that technology in
right.
that space, right? And so that's going to be our challenge. It's going to be a fun and exciting challenge. For many years to come, like you say. So exciting times ahead. Uh, Lean thinking and the power of all of your words of wisdom. Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing all of your learnings and experiences, right? There's a lot of fun activities there that we did together and that, I'll continue to engage with you and make sure that we're continuing to coach others to do some really great work within the manufacturing space.
Great.
With that,
Thank
any
you.
last words from you?
No, Griselda, it's been a pleasure, working with you for all those years and staying in touch and continue to do some things together. One of the things that I learned a long time ago was that
Mhm.
so many other people helped me with my growth. Like, I couldn't even count them all. And I think it's important that we have a spirit of give back. And
Yep.
so I learn so much from other people, and I do my very best where I can to coach, to teach, to try to give back and help some of the younger folks to grow and learn as well, right? So I believe in the spirit of give back. I know you
Yes.
do. And I think it's important that us in the community realize that we're not just doers, right? We have to find a way to help the next generation of people
Right.
to make things great. Um, and
Mhm.
So it's giving back, I think, is very, very important.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, Dan. Greatly appreciate it.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to